I'm Commissioner Ben Hovland with the U.S. Election Assistance Commission. September 15th to October 15th is Hispanic Heritage Month, and as part of the EAC's recognition of this month, I have the pleasure of speaking with Rhode Island Secretary of State Nellie Gorbea, who is serving her second term in that office, having first been sworn in January of 2015. Thank you for speaking with me today, Secretary, as we celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month. I was interested to learn that you were the first Hispanic American to be elected statewide in New England. Quite an accomplishment. Can you talk about the significance of this achievement and what it means for how you approach your office on a daily basis?
Well, thank you, Commissioner. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak with you and celebrate and commemorate both elections and Hispanic Heritage Month. So what does it mean in terms of the significance of the achievement? Well, first of all, Rhode Island does it first. We're number one in Rhode Island. It wasn't any other New England state. And I say also that what I love about it is that it really shows, the promise of American democracy, that the system, while imperfect in many ways, still moves in the right direction. Or as Dr. Martin Luther King put it, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. American democracy was meant to be representative. That has changed from its very beginnings. When it was started, it was to be representative of white landowning men, really, and then we started expanding the franchise, and we did it with a lot of effort and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears by a lot of people that came before me. And the Latino community, like other communities in New England, has been growing here. The Latino community, like all other communities, has been growing here in New England, is what I meant to say. And what we're seeing is that, that we're seeing more and more Latinos are running and winning office. You can't, win on just the Latino vote alone for statewide, especially, but you can have that, that opportunity to run. And I think it's really exciting that in Rhode Island, that is the kind of state that we are. And I am part of a community that has welcomed other groups, Italian Americans, French Canadians, Portuguese, Cape Verdeans, Azorians, you name it, more recently, Nigerians and Liberians and Hmong and Cambodians. And so Latinos, we now have 35 Latino electeds in the state, representing 9 different Latin American countries and the US. And more than half of them are Latinas. They're Hispanic women. So I think it's a pretty significant, my winning is simply an indication of the kind of changes that are happening, not just in Rhode Island, but throughout our country.
That's great. And it really is part of, living up to being, that more perfect union and being inclusive and getting people involved in our democracy in elections. And so along those lines, can you talk about how you got started in elections?
Sure. So I have always been interested in civic engagement in elections. I was that 7th grader that when they explained what student council was, I said, oh, that sounds kind of interesting, after school activity. And I went on and served all 7 years in my student council. And then went on to go to college and got involved in civic activities there too. In college, I was, part of the Puerto Rican students group there. And post-college, I started serving in nonprofit boards in New Jersey. And then fast forward, I moved to Rhode Island and I joined this Governor's Advisory Commission on Hispanic Affairs. And I was tasked with representing that commission on the implementation of the motor voter law of the mid-1990s. So my very first introduction to election systems was that major change. And we all huddled, with a variety of groups around the table. And I really give a lot of credit to the executive director of the Board of Elections, Jan Ruggiero, for bringing together such a diverse group to really struggle and think, okay, how are we going to now do this? The law had been passed, the states were asked to implement it. how could we do it in a way that we didn't inadvertently make it harder for others to vote? And so that was my very first activity, thanks to that law that was passed in 1993 by President Clinton.
Yeah, the National Voter Registration Act. And as we see, in our Election Administration and Voting Survey, or EVE survey, it continues to be the largest source of voter registration all these years later. So a big deal and a good place to start. And actually thinking about that and knowing the impact of voter registration and how that leads to people getting engaged. I was also impressed to learn that during your tenure, voters age 18 to 20 who cast a ballot in the general election increased from 64% from 2014 to 2018. Can you talk a little bit about your work to ensure that some marginalized communities are able to participate in the voting process?
Yeah, well, one of the challenges that everybody who works in election has is how do you span, that vast expanse where people are, because you have to go where people are. That there are people who, yes, have time, they're retired, they have flexibility in their schedules for whatever the reason. And then you've got, young people who are trying to make their way through life and don't necessarily know how things work for elections. And so, we have to go where people are. That's the challenge of government. We're supposed to represent and serve everyone. So in the case of young voters, one of the first things I did when I came into office was to put together an advisory group that would help me think about what are the different ways in which young people could be motivated to register and to eventually vote. And what they said to me was, yep, that wasn't Facebook, it was Instagram. And so we had a summer intern who was college age direct the creation of an Instagram account with some of the funniest memes for elections. I will name it. It's RI Votes. And there are some really wonderful memes there, and some video too on a website, rivotes.org, that has young people speaking to other people like themselves and coming up with all the reasons why they may or may not find time to either register or to participate. And so you've got young people speaking to other young people, and that made a big difference. That made a big difference. Now some of the content sometimes was a little bit edgy, I will say, for my.
I'm gonna check this out.
But overall, it was pretty good. And what we've done since then is to open up the possibility to other high schoolers and college age students, as long as it's nonpartisan and clean. We will entertain you you putting your meme on RI Votes on our Instagram channel. Now, we also did things like going to midnight basketball in the city of Providence with information on registering, getting voter ID cards, which in Rhode Island are free. We did a lot of voter registration at the high schools, but registering is only the first step. The really important part is to get them to feel, why it matters. And so we had just purchased at the beginning of my first term new voting machines. And these were paper ballots, and the machines were able to be programmed fairly easily for the different ballot styles. And so I offered them to high schools for their student council elections. And a couple dozen have taken us up on it. And what that does is it presents to students how to vote with real machines, real ballots, and names on the ballot that they know, that they can get that feeling that between the ballot and themselves and that vote, that somebody's going to be happy in the end and somebody's going to be sad. And it matters that you vote. And so we did that throughout different high schools, and that was incredibly popular. And my idea there was, let's just demystify, the process of voting. Because, I remember going to my first election and voting right after college in New Jersey and going into one of those Schutz lever machines, which were very intimidating. And going like, I don't really know how to do this. And nobody likes to feel stupid about doing something in front of other people, right? You have a whole room full of, adults. So if we had the voting process be done on something that mattered to them, right? Not random people or people that they may or may not identify with, or issues they may or may not identify, but something that was real to them in their schools. My idea was at least that hurdle would be done with. Whether or not they had been with their parents to vote, they could see that. And so that's been an incredibly popular thing that we've done out of this office. And I think all of that, there's no silver bullet for voter engagement. You have to try a number of things. And I'm a big believer that you just sort of try it, and then you see the results. And so we got to see it. It's great.
That's great. And that's absolutely right on making people feel comfortable in the process and familiar with the process. Certainly we've seen the social science around that. I think one other way that I think about, that people become familiar with the process is, is stepping up and serving as a poll worker. I'm hoping that, one of the silver linings that comes out of the 2020 election, we saw a whole new generation of poll workers sign up. And I'm hoping that they'll make a lifetime habit out of it, or continue to potentially serve. Have you been able to do any work to help recruit poll workers in Rhode Island, specifically those from traditionally underrepresented communities, or those who can help provide language assistance to voters that need it?
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, I agree with you. I think that one of the silver linings of last year's really hard election cycle is that next generation of poll workers that signed up. And we saw that in Rhode Island as well. In Rhode Island, just to explain to the people viewing, elections, the day of elections is actually run not by my office, but by the State Board of Elections and the local boards of canvassers. And so the state law requires the boards of canvassers to recruit the poll workers, and then the Board of Elections trains them. So, but everywhere I go, I'm always talking, have you thought of serving as a poll worker? Because you can't not help out. And so a lot of what I did was when I would go to high schools for voter registration drives, to let high school students know that this is something that they can do and get paid or get a credit for it if their school requires some sort of public service. That in Rhode Island, 16 and 17-year-olds can be pre-registered, and they can work the polls if they're a registered or pre-registered voter. So that, opened a lot of eyes immediately, like, I can be 16 and actually, get $150 for the day for there. Yep, you can. So that was great. And a lot of these younger people are multilingual or bilingual. And so, we've partnered with the boards of canvassers to recruit poll workers and provide Spanish language materials to them as needed. And then we also as I said before, we did a lot of reposting of poll worker recruitment information on our various social media channels as well.
It's great. Thinking again, I mentioned 2020, and as we think about, the 2020 election, first and foremost, like by all credible accounts, it was very secure. But we continue to see the proliferation of mis and disinformation, and some of this is targeted at traditionally underrepresented communities. Do you have any recommendations for election officials looking to combat this type of targeted mis and disinformation?
Yes, absolutely. And as somebody who actually had to battle this, not only in English, but in Spanish, which is actually my native language, I was amazed at the attacks in misinformation and disinformation that were being, put forward in the last election cycle. So my first recommendation is, when you have a job opening, please consider finding somebody who can provide you with that diversity within your paid ranks. Nothing beats like having a multilingual staff actually in your office that's part of your trust circle, so that they can become trusted sources of information to the community at large. Now, I've been in the public sector long enough to know that that's not always feasible given FTE caps or budgetary issues, or the fact that people don't tend to turn over as much in the public sector. Although sadly, we've seen a little bit more turnover in elections this year than we have in the past. But if you don't have that opportunity to hire somebody from those communities, then partner with your local ethnic, racial community organizations so that they can be your messengers through, social service agencies, churches. We also do a lot of outreach through Spanish TV and radio. Spanish is the one language that we have to provide in Rhode Island under the Voting Rights Act. So that's one we focus on. But depending on what your geographic area has as their minority languages, make sure that you're investing some of your communication dollars on that, on those mediums. And now there's even, internet channels as well. So, a wide variety of tools that are out there that exist, but you have to get out there and get to know the community and to be known. And you'll find that people will be very receptive. I also want to give a shout out to CISA for putting out some really valuable information about the kinds of misinformation that was happening in other languages. It's a conversation that I know we've had with the EAC and CISA and others. And the threat is real. The threat is very real. We've had a great election cycle last year in terms of it being safe and secure. But it's, cybersecurity is not a destination. We can't say mission accomplished. It's one long road. And I have full faith in the capabilities of our election officials across this country to be able to handle what's up ahead. And we're in this together. We're going to work together to make sure that our democracy lives to the promise of its true nature, which is to be representative of the people who live here and who are part of the citizenry of the United States.
Absolutely. And thank you for all of your work, obviously, on those issues and actually for that very good advice. So we'll finish up here on a high note and just would love to know, how you celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month, both personally and professionally.
Well, professionally, historically, before COVID, we had a big reception and I invited a lot of people over to the State House. And it was a great bash with good music and good food, which is how I think is what the preferred form of celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month is not necessarily panels or YouTube videos. It's actually getting together and having really good food from a variety of countries and excellent music. So yeah, I mean, professionally, that's how we're doing it now is a lot through these mediums. And it is good though, to take a moment to have deeper conversations. I find that being able to reflect on, how far we've come helps us in the battles ahead on the work that still needs to be done. And so a little bit of partying, a little bit of joy, a little bit of like, wow, we've come a long ways. Which is what Hispanic Heritage Month gives us the opportunity to do, helps steel us for the work ahead of the stuff that still needs to happen. And so, that's how I love to celebrate it.
Well, thank you and enjoy the rest of Hispanic Heritage Month. Secretary Gorbea, thank you for joining us.
Muchas gracias, comisionado.